Good evening. Good evening. It is so nice to see all of you. My name is Stuart Hill, and I am a professor of music, an associate professor of music, let me be precise, here at Webster University, and I'm the conductor of the fine ensemble you see coming on stage before you, which is Aurelia. But I just want to say how thrilled we are as the community of Webster University to host this event. And I'm not kidding when I tell you this is the most full I have ever seen this hall in 8 years of university. Yeah. This is amazing. I think it's incredible when an event can pull together multiple ensembles, pull together audience members from all of our family and friends from around the St. Louis region and wherever else you may have come from. But please know that we're really grateful to have you here on our campus tonight and so excited to share this beautiful evening of music. And of course, the music is what you came to hear, not me talking. So I'm going to finish that part right quick. But I do want to tell you a little bit about this first piece you're going to hear. This is called Singkat Siaga by Tracy Wong. Tracy Wong is a Malaysian-Canadian composer, and this piece is inspired in part by an ancient tradition of shadow puppetry from Malaysia, which uses both shadow and light, or it draws inspiration from the idea that both shadow and light are part of life. It takes both shadow and light to make something beautiful, not only in shadow puppetry, but also in our living together. So, we are going to sing that for you as soon as I turn the house lights off, and then we'll be off to the races. So, thank you for being here. We're excited to share this music with you. Thank you. should acknowledge the two soloists you heard, who were Alexandria Stewart and Leanne Magnuson. This next piece is called Refuge. It's by Gwyneth Walker.
Wanna rise, wanna spin, wanna grow in and throw from the sun. Song name is Leanne Latuda, and I am the Artistic and Executive Director of the St. Louis Women's Chorale. And I want to tell you a short story about the flowers that we have on the stage today. Back in 1920, the colors associated with the suffrage movement were yellow, purple, and white. And the suffragists had banners and flags made in those colors. And also, women or people who were pro-suffrage, women's suffrage, wore yellow roses. And people who were anti-women's suffrage wore red roses. So we have these flowers on our stage to honor all the people who worked so very hard to give women the right to vote. As I mentioned, I'm the director of the St. Louis Women's Chorale. This is our 29th season, and we have for 29 years endeavored to give women voice by programming works by women composers and poets. And so it is such an honor and a pleasure for me to welcome to our stage tonight the composer of the Suffrage Cantata, Andrea Ramsey.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Andrea Ramsey, and I'm a composer and conductor based in Kansas City. But it's an honor to be here tonight on the east coast of Missouri in St. Louis. The work that you will hear shortly is the result of over a year of research, planning, and composing. And I began this work naively, hoping to educate myself a bit about suffrage. And I thought that I could contain all of that history in 20 minutes of music, and you'll see tonight it's actually closer to 40, and even that does not contain this whole story. You see, when I was in school growing up, all I remember about women's suffrage was a small paragraph that mentioned Susan B. Anthony, and then somehow women could vote. That was the extent of it. And maybe that's changed, I don't know, but Susan B. Anthony wasn't even alive when the amendment that bore her name passed the legislature. And the journey to the 19th Amendment would last through multiple generations, over 70 years. It was a huge, huge endeavor. In addition to reading lots of books and articles about this, I also took 2 research trips to prepare for this. One to New York, where I explored the archives at the University of Rochester and held letters written by Stuart Chapman Hill, Lucy Stone, and Susan B. Anthony. I visited the Susan B. Anthony House in Seneca Falls. And I had another trip to Washington, D.C., where I toured multiple suffrage exhibits at the National Archives, et cetera, et cetera. But I also went to a tour of the Belmont Hall Equality House. And if you're ever in D.C., this is really worth a stop. It's a building that housed the headquarters of the National Women's Party. And an interesting fact, though, the headquarters, the original location of the National Women's Party, headquarters is where the United States Supreme Court currently sits. True fact. In the 1920s, citing eminent domain, the government decided the Supreme Court needed its own building, and that National Women's Party location was pretty sweet. So they took that over, and that's now where the Supreme Court sits. And our Supreme Court building was literally created by taking something that belonged to women at that time. And that is, that's a rabbit that we could chase, but I'm gonna leave that, and instead come back to telling you about this tour that I took at the Belmont Hall Equality House. I showed up, it was hot, I'd been walking, and I thought I needed some air conditioning. I'm talking with the tour guide before everybody else gets there because I'm early. And naively, I was just sort of fishing, and I said, I know some of the white suffragists were racially problematic. And the tour guide says, oh, they were all racially problematic. And I moved through the tour, and I saw this. I saw women who were beaten, who were jailed, who were imprisoned, who were tortured for the right to vote, who were also deeply flawed. And some of the most celebrated women in this movement, the white women in particular, fought diligently for the causes of abolition and for women's rights, and then still were really classist and racist, and the decisions, the documents of those times reflect that, even to the point of omitting women of color from the histories that they wrote about their movement. So it was important to me that I included, and not just included, but celebrated those women of color who contributed to this work. But it was challenging because for every article I could find on Frances Helen Watkins Harper or Mary Church Chorale, there were 15 more for Lucy Stone or Elizabeth Cady Stanton. It was May of 2019 when I began my research, and in less than a year, our own history was shifting in massive ways. We were in the midst of a global pandemic. There was then the murder of George Floyd. There was a season of sustained protest, a national re-examination. I began writing the music in March of 2020, and archivist Autumn Haig at the University of Rochester had agreed to help me double-check my historical accuracy, and I appreciated that, but it soon became clear to me that my lens as a white woman was myopic, and I had too many blind spots. So I reached out to Dr. Marcia Chapman, who was a professor then of African American Studies at Georgetown, and whom I'd seen on a PBS documentary about suffrage. And I hired her. I said, "Would you be interested in this?" And she agreed and came on as a consultant to help me see these things. And I was so fortunate to have learned from her, and this project was transformed by her input and her thoughts. To give you one example of a subtle but important change she made, in the third movement, you'll hear a line talking about Ida B. Wells Barnett that says, "So Ida fled to Chicago." The original text that I'd written said, "So Ida moved to Chicago." And Dr. Chapman kindly pointed out that Ida did not have a choice in this matter. So the small things like that, the things that matter. At the outset of the work, when I first started this, I assumed that the music and the stories would be equally balanced. As I got into it, it became clear that there were too many stories that were too important, and that the music was now going to need to serve the stories. And so the narrator moved to the foreground, and I had folders and folders of color-coded fragments of things, banners and documents and things that I had sorted by theme, and I felt obsessed, particularly about sharing as many stories as I could, as cohesively as I could. And I wrestled with, should that be a lyric? Should that be narration? What's going to happen? And then I felt angry that all of these heroes were kept from me, that I never knew about them when I was learning history. It broke my heart. I had a fire under me. It was like when I wrote my dissertation, but a lot more fun. And like I kept going, and suddenly I realized this is not just an extended musical work. This is feeling more like a choral documentary. The movements got a little bit longer. Apart from movement 1 and movement 3, all of the lyrics, that movement 1 and 3 have a couple of original lyrics, but everything else comes from original texts from these suffragists and things that they said and spoke in speeches and in documents. There are 5 movements to the cantata, and it's a bit of a rough palindrome. So some of the music in movement 1 will be repeated in movement 5. Some of the things you hear in 2 will be in 4, and then 3 will be its own thing, centering Ida B. Wells Barnett and the parade at DC in 1913. That movement, movement 3, is the only movement that contains some music that is not written by me. You'll hear a march called Fall in Line by Zena S. Hahn that was likely performed at that parade, and you will not miss it because it sounds like a marching band at a parade. It's very obvious. Sometimes it's nice to have a few things to listen for when you're experiencing a new work, so I thought I'd throw a couple of those at you. In the first movement, you'll hear a melody, and it goes, "One day the women got tired. One day the women got tired. One day the women got tired enough to move." And when you listen to that melody, if you keep it in your brain, later when you come back in the 5th movement, you'll hear a slightly altered version of that, set to the words of Mary Church Chorale, which goes, "Lifting as we climb, onward and upward we go, struggling and striving and hoping, we knock at the door of justice, asking an equal chance." It goes a little, I pitched that a little higher than that. But you can listen for that. In movements 2 and 4, there's a lot of raw emotion and challenge. kicked off Susan B. Anthony for most of the time, and then some other things about her. And then Movement 4 was the hardest for me to write, because Movement 4 needed to honor the 500, almost 500 women who were arrested over those 2 years. Some of whom were abused, some of whom endured torturous force feedings while on hunger strikes in prison, literally, and I think it's important we know these things. But they were a tube that they would shove up their nose or down their throat and funnel raw eggs and milk. And some of those women suffered damage the rest of their life as a result of that. So you will hear that. It will feel quite chaotic in Movement 4. The narrator will be speaking over the choir at times. That is by design. There will be lines that may come out, slashing through the texture, describing those are first-hand accounts of what they endured in those evenings. This also included the Night of Terror, when 33 suffragists were beaten by guards with clubs at the Occoquan Workhouse. I knew I had to tell these stories, but I was most nervous about this movement because I wanted to get it right, and I knew it wouldn't be easy. But I think there are so many parallels to be drawn. And this is what history does for us when we look at it, and we think about it, and chew on it. We can revisit these heroic women being force-fed in prison after decades of striving toward their goal. We can imagine what it might have been like after enduring all of that to catch word that the amendment had failed yet again to clear the legislature. If you were a suffragist in 1917, those were dark times, maybe the darkest you've seen yet. However, just 4 months after the Night of Terror that I talked to you about, a DC Court of Appeals declared that the suffragists' arrests were unconstitutional. 2 years later, the 19th Amendment passed. 1 year after that, it was ratified and became law. It's reasonable that we stare painfully at our challenges during the current season of the United States. We can feel concern for the cracks that we see appearing in our democracy. But maybe also, we can remember this ever-fragile democracy's long history and how so often these cracks are patched up, and how so frequently the brightest days of our country are built in response to the deepest darknesses. How when we are activated to participate fully in this democratic experiment, things can shift dramatically as a result. I want to close with 2 suffragists who did not make it into the cantata. Elsie Hill and Hazel Hunkins Hallinan. What a name. They were both arrested for holding a meeting on public grounds and climbing on a statue. They were in Lafayette Park, and they were there to burn the speeches of Woodrow Wilson as the empty words that they were. And they spoke from the lower parts of the statue so that the crowd could see them. During sentencing, Elsie Hill offered the following words. During all my years of suffrage work, I've been told and retold that a woman's place is on a pedestal. And the very first time I get on one, I'm arrested. Hazel, when she was arrested, wired the following message to her parents in Montana. 26 of America's finest women are accompanying me to jail. It's splendid, don't worry, love Hazel. Thank you for choosing to spend your Friday evening here supporting the arts. Thank you to the St. Louis Women's Chorale for programming my work, for extending the invitation to visit, and to all our joining choruses and their directors, our soloists, our narrator, our instrumentalists. I appreciate all the hard work you've put into this, and I can't wait to experience this regional premiere of Suffrage Cantata alongside you.
1830. Of the 24 United States, half were slave states. Of the 2 million enslaved, half were women. For those women not enslaved, voting, speaking in public, preaching in church, and a formal education were not permitted. When a woman married, usually at a young age, her property became her husband's. Her body was not hers to control. She was expected to bear many children and raise them while tending to the labors of a 19th century household. There were few options. She could be a teacher, seamstress, housekeeper, or mill worker, but she would be paid 1/3 what men in the same positions were paid, yet expected to pay taxes in full. Even what she earned was not her own, as her husband could collect her wages from her employer at any time. Legally, she was her husband's property. If he beat her, she had no recourse. If he abused her, she could not divorce him. If he wanted a divorce, he could take her children. Taking her children and leave her destitute. The United States women's rights movement of the 1800s came to life in the ancestral home of the Haudenosaunee, dubbed Iroquois by French and English settlers. This land, called the state of New York after colonization, was home to a variety of women's lived experiences. middle-class white women aired the frustration of their constrained realities to one another. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who would go on to be a leader in the women's rights movement, described attending a small tea party of disgruntled women where, in addition to serving tea, she also poured out the torrent of her long accumulating discontent. Meanwhile, black women were living in a state that had just ended slavery. Full emancipation arrived in 1827 for New Yorkers. Women like Harriet Jacobs and Sojourner Truth had both endured the torture of slavery and were now sharing their personal stories as activists for abolition and supporters of women's rights. And the women of the 6 indigenous nations of the Haudenosaunee were living in communities that modeled women's equality to men. They owned property, had a voice in religious life, nominated leaders, and removed them if necessary. Some early women's rights leaders had interactions with the Haudenosaunee, including Matilda Jocelyn Gage, who was adopted into the Wolf clan of the Mohawk Nation and given a name meaning "she who holds the sky." Charlotte Woodward, 19 years old. At first, we traveled quite alone, but before we had gone many miles, we came on other wagon loads of women, bound in the same direction. At different crossroads, we saw wagons coming from every part of the country, and before we reached Seneca Falls, we were a procession. When Charlotte's wagon reached the first Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls, over 300 people were there, including 40 men who were permitted inside but not allowed to speak the first day. When Elizabeth Cady Stanton presented the Declaration of Rights and Sentiments, her voice was so quiet that many struggled to hear her. The document, modeled after the Declaration of Independence, contained 11 resolutions to be voted upon the following day. All the resolutions passed easily, except the one Stanton authored alone, which called for the enfranchisement of women. One man stood to defend the resolution. His name was Frederick Douglass, and after he spoke, it passed by 2 votes. (1853), Broadway Tabernacle, New York. Sojourner Truth had endured much in her life. She refused to let her life's light be determined by the darkness that surrounded her. But we will have our rights. But we will have our safely torn. And keep us from the safely torn. If you can. 3 years after Seneca Falls, Elizabeth Cady Stanton became friends with a woman whose name would one day be synonymous with women's suffrage, Susan B. Anthony. Susan was unmarried and able to travel and lecture while Elizabeth was tending to many children at home. A partnership was formed, or as Elizabeth put it, I forged the thunderbolts and Susan fired them. On November 5th, 1872, Anthony voted illegally, setting into motion a plan she hoped would eventually gain the women's vote. The 14th Amendment contained ambiguous language. Stanton and Anthony hoped it could be exploited for the cause of women's suffrage. If all persons born in the United States were citizens, didn't that include women? Weren't women citizens? Seeing an ad in a Rochester paper that encouraged registration for the upcoming election, Susan took her 3 sisters and 11 other women down to the local barber shop. At first, they were ignored and then asked to leave. But when Susan read the 14th Amendment to the registrars and threatened to sue, the men surprisingly agreed. They were convinced by Susan's promise that she would pay their fines if the government ever came after them. Her act of voting became a national story. Yet 13 days later, a federal marshal knocked at her door. Seeming embarrassed, he indicated Susan was to be arrested and should come downtown, but no rush. Susan insisted that if he believed her to be a criminal, he should arrest her just as he would any man. She went to change, and upon returning, presented her wrist to the officer for handcuffing. He would not cuff her, but did accompany her. As they boarded the trolley, the driver asked her for her fare, and she announced, loudly enough for every passenger to hear, that she was traveling at the expense of the federal government. Pointing at the marshal, she said, After her lawyer bailed her out of jail, Susan B. Anthony spent the months before her trial delivering a lecture titled, Is it a crime for a citizen of the United States to vote? She gave this lecture in all 29 towns of Monroe County and convinced so many people of her reasoning that the prosecution had to move the case to a neighboring county. We the people United States versus Susan B. Anthony took place in June of 1873 and lasted 2 days. With an all-white, all-male jury and a judge who had written his decision before any of the evidence was presented, it was hardly a fair trial. Susan had not been allowed to speak until the final day when the judge ordered her to stand and asked, Has the prisoner anything to say why sentence shall not be pronounced? Yes, Your Honor. I have many things to say, for in your verdict of guilty you have trampled every vital principle of government. Wrong of citizenship. I judge ordered Susan B. Anthony to sit down, something he would have to do 6 separate times before she was finished. And he sentenced her to pay a fine of $100 plus the cost of prosecution. But Susan had thoughts on that. Susan B. Anthony kept her word to the judge. She never paid the $100 fine for as long as she lived. Traveling in frozen rail cars, bone-jarring carriages, and often being refused hotel rooms because she was alone, she tirelessly lectured, lobbied, and petitioned, devoting her entire life to the cause of women's rights. She encouraged younger women to try their wings, as she put it, by cultivating their writing and speaking abilities. And though she did not live to see the day women could vote, she knew that day would come. In the year of her passing at age 86, she was still inspiring those who would carry her banner forward. Was born in Mississippi 6 months before the Emancipation Proclamation. After losing both parents and a sibling to yellow fever, she convinced the school board in Memphis that she was 18 years old so she could be hired as a teacher and provide for her younger siblings. 8 years later, Ida was fired from teaching for writing about school corruption in a newspaper column. A talented writer, Ida decided to start her own newspaper. Ida's paper grew to be a successful endeavor. She boldly called out white supremacy and shined the light of truth on the horrors of lynching in the South. But when her friends who owned a grocery business were lynched, and she published that their lynchings were because they were economically successful black men, an angry white mob destroyed her newspaper building while she was away on a trip. Armed men waited outside her home to kill her, and friends warned her that she could not return to Memphis. So Ida fled to Chicago.
I simply assumed she was occupied, but when Susan B. Anthony got back from town, the stenographer why she did not show.
The stenographer told Susan B. Anthony that she would not take dictation from a woman of color.
Susan B. Anthony steeled her gaze and she spoke calm and low. An insult to my guest is an insult to me. Go get your bonnet and go.
An activist on multiple fronts, Ida fought to help women gain the right to vote in Illinois and confronted white women who ignored women of color in the movement. A founding member of the NAACP, she established the Alpha Suffrage Club and lectured internationally. Taking on injustice was a lifelong pursuit for Ida. Even as a teacher in the South, she sued the railroad when they forcibly removed her from her car.
A clean train car, I paid 30 cents for my ticket. When the conductor tried to take me from the smoking car, I told him, sir, I won't go in it. And when he tried to move me, I bit his hand, bit it hard enough, he had to get another man. And after the two of them took me to the smoke and squalor, I sued the railroad and won $500. Yes, the white women need the balance, but my women even more. I like to buy a railroad ticket and choose my own car. When the men try to put you where you don't belong, you square your jaw and fix your gaze. 'Cause a woman's place is the seat she bought when a woman knows her place.
March 1913, the staging grounds near the Capitol filled with women finding their places. Washington, D.C. was about to experience a parade like no other. Horses neighed, wagons creaked, and musicians warmed up. Women marching was a radical idea. Men marched, not women. But parade organizers Alice Paul and Lucy Burns wanted to show how power did not rest only with men. They also knew this was the perfect day, given Woodrow Wilson's inauguration was the next day, and there would be lots of press in town. Inez Milholland led the charge. Riding a white horse, wearing a gold tiara, she would forever be known as the Joan of Arc of suffrage. Behind her, the first wagon of the parade bore a massive banner stating the women's demands. There were 8,000 women on Pennsylvania Avenue in academic gowns and work uniforms. There were banners from almost every state, including a delegation from Illinois, the state that Ida B. Wells had traveled from Chicago to join. Unfortunately, Illinois, like many states, wanted only white women in their delegation. These states worried that Southern voters would not support suffrage if black women were seen marching alongside. Ida was asked to march at the back of the parade with the rest of the black women. At 52 years old, and having done more for suffrage than most white Illinois delegates, she was incensed. Wounded, but determined to take her rightful place, she did not go to the back, but instead waited on the sidelines. When Illinois marched by, Ida stepped out of the crowd, linked arms with two allies near the front, and marched the entire rest of the parade. We all believe in the idea of democracy. Woman suffrage is the application of democracy to women. Mabel Ping-Hua Lee, suffragist and the first Chinese woman to earn a doctorate in the United States. When the doorkeeper got up to let Mabel Vernon sit down, her friend joked it was because she looked pregnant. Indeed, Mabel had secretly pinned a large banner under her skirts. President Woodrow Wilson was giving his December address to Congress, and at the opportune moment, Mabel unfurled the yellow sateen, dropping it over the balcony with the help of her friends.
This
A murmur rustled through the floor, but in this moment and in subsequent meetings, Woodrow Wilson remained unmoved. Harriet Stanton Blatch floated a new idea, the Silent Sentinels, an unceasing presence of women at the White House gates with messaged banners in the suffrage colors of purple, yellow, and white. This would be radical. Labor pickets were one thing, but to take up a grievance with the president. No one had ever picketed the White House like this before. This first line of sentinels arrived in January of 1917. The sentinels kept watch through all of winter, and apart from the occasional insult, things had been fairly calm. But when the U.S. entered World War I in April, picketing a wartime president was seen as unpatriotic. The banners were sharply worded, calling out the president and envoys from other countries. Angry mobs threw rocks and eggs. Banners were torn, and women were shoved, kicked, and dragged across the pavement. For the next 2 years, almost 500 women would be arrested on ludicrous charges, such as obstructing traffic or meeting on public grounds. And as the women persisted, the prison sentences grew even longer. When the leader of the National Women's Party, Alice Paul, was sentenced to 7 months in the district jail, she wrote her mother not to worry, reassuring her it would merely be a delightful rest. But Alice's reality in prison would be far from delightful. Before her sentence was over, Alice would be subjected to a foul-smelling cell, meals of worm-ridden pork, placed in solitary confinement, deprived of sleep, and ultimately moved to the psychopathic ward, having her mental fitness questioned. She was strapped down, a tube shoved up her nose, and milk and raw eggs funneled down her throat. Fellow suffragist Rose Winslow endured the same treatment, smuggling out details of their conditions on scraps of paper. If the Wilson administration thought they would weaken the suffragists by torturing their leaders, they were undoubtedly surprised on November 10th when the longest picket line yet appeared outside the White House. Over 30 women were arrested, including Lucy Burns, who helped form the National Woman's Party with Alice Paul. All of them were sent to the Occoquan workhouse away from Alice in the district jail. The women were greeted upon arrival by the workhouse superintendent and up to 40 angry men wielding clubs. Women were beaten, choked, and violently thrown into cells, some knocked unconscious. Lucy Burns' hands were tied over her head, her clothes stripped off. She was left only with a blanket. Calling out to the others, she was threatened with a gag and straitjacket. when the others cried for help, the guards ignored their pleas. This evening would be known as the Night of Terror. As many as 30 women would go on hunger strikes in protest of their horrible treatment in prison, many enduring forced feedings just as Alice Paul had. The administration, faced with negative press and women who could not be broken, released all the suffrage prisoners by the end of November. Upon their release, Alice Paul proclaimed, "We are put out of jail as we were put in, at the whim of government. They tried to terrorize us, they could not, so they freed us." The Susan B. Anthony Amendment passed the House in 1918, but failed to clear the Senate, so the suffragists continued their protests. The watchfires involved burning copies of Woodrow Wilson's speeches as the empty words that they were. And in February of 1919, a trainload of former suffrage prisoners went on a cross-country speaking tour, telling of their experiences. By May, a newly elected pro-suffrage majority of Congress would ensure the Susan B. Anthony Amendment passed both the House and the Senate with relative ease. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. From here, the amendment would need to be ratified by 36 states. Though public sentiment on suffrage was shifting, there was much work to be done. And unfurled a celebratory banner outside headquarters. She'd been quietly sewing a new star on the banner for each state that ratified the 19th Amendment, and now it was finished. 36 stars, 36 states. In August of 1920, all eyes were on Tennessee, the final state to ratify. In Nashville, freshman legislator Harry Byrne had an anti-suffrage red rose on his lapel, but the letter in his pocket weighed more heavily on his mind. was a widowed tax-paying landowner, and when her son Harry cast his vote of aye, the room gave way to confused gasps. Had it really happened? Had women actually won the vote? The room exploded. There was weeping, screaming, and singing. Dr. Mary Walker was the first woman to win the Congressional Medal of Honor. A surgeon and a spy in the Civil War, she wrote, "Nothing but the ballot in woman's hand will right these wrongs." But for women of color, the struggle was more complex than this. Having picketed with silent sentinels, Mary Church Terrell wrote, "A white woman has only one handicap to overcome, that of sex. I have two, both sex and race." Black suffragists worked hard in their churches and communities, often being ignored by white suffragists and written out of the historical records. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper remarked, "I do not believe that giving woman the ballot is going to cure all the evils of life. I do not believe that white women are just dewdrops exhaled from the skies. I think that like men, they may be divided into the good, the bad, and the indifferent. The good would vote according to their convictions and principles, the bad as they're dictated by prejudice or malice, and the indifferent will vote on the strongest side of the question with the winning party."
Lifting as we climb, onward and upward we go, struggling and striving and hoping. We knock at the door of justice, asking for equal change.
The 19th Amendment was a 72-year struggle, but for women of color, the struggle would continue. Zetkala Sa of Yankton Sioux heritage fought for indigenous Americans to gain citizenship in 1924. Their right to vote, however, was decided state by state, with New Mexico and Arizona being the last in 1948. Chinese immigrants would vote in 1943. And for black women, repeatedly suppressed at the polls, the poll tax was ended in 1964, and the Voting Rights Act created in 1965. Voters with disabilities were given a special protection in 1982. As Carrie Chapman Hill said, "Women have suffered agony of soul which you can never comprehend, that you and your daughters might inherit political freedom. That vote has been costly, prized